Everybody, thank you for your interest in watching this webinar. Today is a very important subject that we will talk about. It is successful advocacy, and we have a remarkable speaker, Hellen Swales. She is the current BPW New Zealand president, deputy mayor of her city, and she was a city councillor and an expert in advocacy, as you can see. Thank you, Hellen. The floor is yours.
Wow, here we are again doing a presentation on successful advocacy. This is really important for us as an organisation, and what I want to particularly focus on is advocacy and successful advocacy at the United Nations level, where we start looking at international treaties. So what I want to do is take us to the United Nations and remind you that actually we have representatives in New York, we have representatives in Geneva, we have representatives in Paris, and we have representatives in Rome and Bangkok. And I'm sure with the new office that's opened in Africa, we will have representation there. But it's knowing that this is the next level, at a global level, that we start looking at taking our voice and using the people that we have in those spaces to have an ear directly in there. It's also the next level that we take when we take our resolutions to Congress. The expectation from me or from us as an organisation is that we should be able to take those recommendations to our delegates at the United Nations and get them to work for us. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to start looking at the United Nations treaties and conventions that are there. But when you look at these United Nations conventions, I've only put up a few up on the slide here for you, are the ones that probably have the most influence or impact on the people that you represent in your country. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to go and look at the United Nations website and find out which are the treaties that your country is a signatory to. It may be, if you've never done this before, that you're talking and looking at a whole foreign language, because all of a sudden, those of us that are used to working in this space use anagrams. And it's not good when you're trying to bring someone with you who is only just entering in that space. So you need to remember that when you're talking about international treaties, you expand what those anagrams mean and bring the people along with you when you're talking about them. So at the moment, I'm talking about the treaties that are the most important to us here in New Zealand. So in order of preference, where we are doing, and we actually have a moment at the moment where a piece of legislation is out in our country around the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. What you also need to know is that we have a working group within BPW-NZ, that there is a committee that is on Resolution 1325. I have to admit that when my Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade asked me to do a presentation to four armed forces, which were the United States American Armed Forces, the New Zealand one Defence Force, the Australian Defence Force, and the People's Republic of China, on women in disaster and recovery and how we have a position in there. I used the resources of our committee, which was chaired by who was co-chaired by Anne Hilty, and our immediate past president, Irina, from Greece. It was wonderful to be able to go to them and get some information. So for us, this resolution is really important. We usually provide people in New Zealand on peacekeeping treaties and work, but it's not only that, it's about this treaty was formed or created to help women in conflict areas and to actually make sure that they are part of the decision making. So for us, at a distance, we know that the important role for us is to have a voice into that Security Council via this resolution to improve the life of women and have their voice heard in conflict areas. And just because you're not part of that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be part of the conversation. So that's an important resolution, and you need to know whether your country is part of it and to actively participate in that. The other convention that is really important for women and girls is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And the anagram for that is CEDAW. This is a convention that is worked upon and comes up in a cycle of every 4 years. So when your cycle is up, you then start preparing for another 4 years. So a good work of plan with regard to responding to this particular treaty is that you collaborate with other civil society or NGOs in your country, and you look at the articles that come under CEDAW. And what you do in that collaboration, which is SDG 17, you have a round table and you look at what are the most important issues for you as an organisation. So as an example, in New Zealand, Zonta will pick up violence against women because that is one of their main pillars. BPW has always fought for the equal rights of women in the workplace. So we usually take that stance in New Zealand. You have family planning and you have women in parliament. So each of civil society will take a lead of one of those articles. So over a 4-year period, we meet maybe 3 times a year. And what we do is we update what our government is doing against each of those articles, so that when we are ready, that our government does a report in that 4-year cycle, we put up an alternate report to that, where we get the opportunity to critique in an international forum in Geneva how well our government is doing against the recommendations that were given the 4 years previous. So in New Zealand, we have 77 recommendations that were given to us in 2018 when we did our report. I was part of the lead of that. But what it meant for us in New Zealand is that we were able to do fact sheets, we were able to do training, we collectively went there as a group of civil society, and we got to know and meet the committee members, and we thought outside the square. So whilst you have a 10-15 minute window, you need to, as an organisation, we need to as an organisation, to push the barrow. And when I say push the barrow, that I mean is that we asked the committee if we could provide them lunch and have a meeting that would take an hour rather than 20 minutes because we were feeding them. Because of that, we were then also able to zoom into that meeting that we had with all of the committees back to New Zealand to have all of civil society participate at that conversation with all of the committee that we were reporting to. We were also well versed in having fact sheets on each of the articles that were there that had happened post when we had sent in our report, because as we all know, these things need to be sent in a good 6 months sometimes before we actually physically give our presentation. So you need to be prepared to know what the system is, how it works, and how to make it work for you. So there is a training that is done that does cost you, which happens 5 days before you actually give your verbal report, and these trainings actually happen in each of the regions, and you will have civil society that actually have a contract to do the training with you in Geneva prior to you giving your presentation. I would certainly recommend anyone who is going to give an oral submission to go to those trainings. We had the State of Palestine, who had never done a presentation before, with us in the training, and we also had another small country, Turkestan, that was part of, and the Cook Islands. So there were 4 countries that were presenting at the same time. We collectively worked together, but we also helped support those smaller countries that were not as well versed in leveraging off how to make the best out of that experience. So We've called unsuccessfully for a royal commission to our country around violence against women in our country, that the country repertoire for violence against women asked our government to do. We were stalled, but it's still because we were there and we activated the rights as a signatory to that and civil society to get our government to actually take stance. So what's come out of our report of the 77 recommendations is that we have to report back to them this year in June around, out of the 77, 50 of the recommendations of where we are and what progress we've made. It's also made our government look at Indigenous people, which we have now got a dashboard on our Ministry for Women around how Indigenous people are affected, because they are the most affected when it comes to violence in the family and intimate partner relationship and violence. So for the Convention of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, it's one of the strongest treaties that you can activate in your country and remind your government when there are pieces of legislation around justice, access to justice, courtroom procedures and policies, you know, women in leadership, and particularly around legislation around equal pay. This convention is absolutely ideal for you to make references to your government to remind them that they're signatories to this, they have an obligation of duty of care to actually activate these into their policies. The next one that I've got there is what they call the Universal Periodic Review, or the UPR. This is done in a 7-year cycle, and we have just gone through ours at the beginning of 2019. This Universal Periodic Review is a little bit interesting in the sense that this is one where you activate other countries to come to the floor and speak on your behalf. And when I say that, what happens is when you look at because this is a human rights mechanism, so when you look under the periodic review of the human rights in your country, you look at women with disabilities, you look at access to justice, you look at human trafficking, all of the things that affect women. But when you look at those issues and you've identified the most appalling issues that are happening in your country that you want to focus on, you go to like-minded missions that are based in Geneva to help you with your submission. Because what happens with the Universal Periodic Review is that you are questioned, your government is questioned by peers, your peers, other governments. So what BPW New Zealand did was, when we were going through our periodic review and we identified that one of the issues that was a concern for us was women with disabilities. And we knew that the mission of Egypt had a strong stance on women with disabilities. So we produced a 1-page fact sheet that we actually engaged with the Egyptian mission here in New Zealand. We talked to them and we gave them a fact sheet, which then sent to, and we also CC'd our own copy, to the mission in Geneva. And those questions were actually put to our government by the Egyptian mission when it was their turn to question our government. We also had questions on the inequality around equal pay for our Indigenous women. So what we did was, we knew we had an ally in Mexico. So once again, we activated those relationships and asked them, we prepared a 1-page fact sheet and asked them to ask on our behalf, question what was our country doing to correct the injustices for the Indigenous people in New Zealand. These are important things to know around these different treaties, of who your allies are globally and how you get those allies to ask and pose the questions that you are also able to do, but it's coming from them or your country having to justify to the world what their stance is, what they intend to do, and how they intend to remedy it. So having or being aware of that and how it works is a powerful tool, and you need to be able to activate it to the benefit of the people in your country. There is a website and a link that you can go to that will actually, or you can engage, so who you engage with in your country to help you with the Universal Periodic Review is your Human Rights Commission. So this is where BPW in New Zealand have a really good working relationship with our Human Rights Commission, and we actually work with them, and we were able to get people from the Human Rights Commission out from Switzerland to come and do 2 trainings in New Zealand, both in Christchurch and in Wellington, to go through the process for civil society so that they had an understanding of what it was. People need to know that the funding is there at the United Nations to actually do that, but if you don't know to ask, then you won't ask. So I think that's enough on the Universal Periodic Review. The next one is the Paris Agreement. So obviously this is all around climate change, and it's looking at what we need to do to implement or encourage our government to implement policies that are to the advantage of us globally to slow down global warming. So in the past 12 months, we have used the Paris Agreement to great effect. We are a signatory of it and one of the leading countries in trying to get implemented in our own country, but also getting international leaders to actually get up and step up and start implementing some of these agreements that the countries who have signed into it actually do this. Now, I know that Marie-Claude in Paris is a very strong advocate for BPW in that space, and certainly would appreciate any work or know of any work that any of the countries are doing in that space around carbon emissions, trade agreements, all of those things that help her in putting an argument together when they are negotiating a better world for us globally around climate change. So it's a huge thing that we're using. Our very first submission this year in New Zealand was on carbon emissions, which we have a date coming up very, very soon where we go and do our oral submission. But once again, that's another important agreement that you need to be aware of, and you need to build your policy around it, and you need to start pushing your government to start looking at it and addressing those issues so that you are part of the global movement that is happening. The next one is the optional protocol to the International Convention on the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Now, this is an important one, and people need to understand that BPW International was one of the first ones to get ECOSOC status. And they need to understand actually what does ECOSOC status mean to us and how you can activate that. Now, ECOSOC status is about the rights of the individual or the rights of a business, a club, but this is where you take any concerns or grievances that you have to the International Human Rights Platform. It's not one that's activated very often. I know that there was some talk that BPW Australia might have been taking a case to the Human Rights Commission using this particular convention. But it's one that you need to be aware of, that if your country is part of it, it is a tool that you can activate for personal human rights grievance that you have. So it's about the individual complaint being able to be heard on an international arena if you feel that you are not getting anywhere in your own country. Once again, it's a good link to go and have a look about the articles that are there and how they work. Now, you have a convention which is the ECOSOC convention. When you put an optional protocol in front of any of your conventions, it means that it has 3 or 2 tiers to the original article. So a country can be part of ECOSOC, but if you're going to activate an optional protocol, that is another layer that you need to make sure that your government is signed up to. in order for you to invoke it or to use it in your country. So that is an interesting one that not many people know about, or not one that people use, because it is a grievance process, one of the grievance or mechanisms that you can bring a complaint to the floor. The other one that I want to talk to you about is an important one to us as BPW, because it came up at our Congress in 2014 around the Convention on Consent to Marry, minimum age for marriage and registration. It's becoming a very global issue, because whilst it might have been born out of some countries and some continents and some cultures, because the world is shrinking, this is becoming a global issue. I know that it was an issue that was introduced to New Zealand, and I'm sure it is an issue that is introduced to other countries. So knowing that it is a convention and that it is there, and you do have the right to, to activate it or to use it if you think that things are not happening correctly in your country around age of marriage or consent of marriage. There have been some changes with what's happening with our legislation in New Zealand, and we made a reference back to this particular convention and reminded them that actually you're now turning into another convention, which is around the Convention of the Child. So there are a number of international treaties and conventions, and we do have groups within our organisation that feather into some of these conventions really, really well. When you look at some of the, the governance structure on health and trade and enterprise that international BPW have, that they would be working in these spaces quite fully. Also, when you're looking at responding to these in your submissions, or going to respond to them internationally, or reminding your government that these are part of it, don't forget to actually ask federations, BPW federations and affiliates that work in this space or that are in this space, to actually give you content that can give you that social or emotional pull when you're going and talking about these treaties and conventions. I know that at CSW 62, there was working on migrants and refugees that were working around the country, that Eva Richter, who is a past UN delegate in New York, was attending and invited me to go to. So there are lots of conventions out there that, or pieces of work that people are doing, that are trying to bring them into being a convention or a treaty that is actually governments sign up to, and making sure that it's a better world for women and girls. So what I really wanted to do in this short presentation was to bring to the fore the importance of international treaties and conventions, that you need to be aware of the ones that your country is signed up to and are signatories to, that they are important tools that you can use and activate. And if you're unsure, then go to our UN representatives. Be aware of what they cover in their particular country, like who Geneva cover and what access they have. What do they cover in New York? What do they cover in Rome and Paris and Bangkok? It is important to know these things if you're going to start using them as a tool, because they are a powerful tool for us to use and to activate, and to remind the social conscience of our elected people that these are some of the protocols, or some of the standing orders, for another word, that they need to work by. So once again, just a reminder that these are really important. So when you do, as I said, you need to check if your country is a signatory of any of these, and you need to look at using these as responses in your submissions. Collaborate to get these reports done, because they're huge reports, and they are quite prescriptive in how you actually respond to these. There needs to be probably a working party under the VP-UN that actually has a collaborative forum there that will help and assist a country that has never responded to any of these articles or treaties or conventions before. You need to also link into your regional governance under the United Nations. I know Asia Pacific, we have a very strong regional presence here that is pulling a lot of countries together and responding particularly to the Beijing Platform Plus 25. And ensure that actually when we take resolutions to Congress, that we actually follow up, that those resolutions need to go to our UN representatives, and we need to help and support them to advocate for affecting change globally, because whilst we accept them on the international floor, it's no use if it's not activated. And like I said, collaboration. There is nothing better than when I presented on Resolution 1325 and I collaborated. I actually used the work that BPW did in Nepal after the earthquake in 2015. And I also cited the work that is happening and the application process that BPW Turkey are going through with regard to the Syrian refugees that they've got there. So, you know, don't limit yourself to your country. Put yourself out there and ask for help. Don't be shy. The answer can only be yes or no. And I found that our sisterhood is only too happy to help us. So BPW New Zealand would be only too happy to step up, as would our UN representatives. They would be absolutely aghast and rapt if you were to engage with them. And on that note, remember who our standing committees are and use them to the best, because we've got a health one and we use that when we go and support and use any of the stuff that comes out of the World Health Organization. So I'm going to leave you with that. I think that's enough. There is an awful lot more that can be said, but I just want to once again thank you for this opportunity. Hope it was helpful. And hopefully it will give you some insights of how to use and activate some of these international treaties going forward.
A big thank you to our presenter, Hellen Swales, current national president of BPW New Zealand and a longtime politician in her own town and city. We appreciate your expertise, Hellen, and particularly in this area of advocacy, which is certainly one of the basic tenets of BPW. We also know that many of our members are often a little confused about how best to advocate for women's issues in their area. And some of that is specific to their area, their city, their country, but a lot of it is universal principles and skills. And in bringing together the idea of international treaties that of course nations then sign on to, but don't always actually put into effect, and how we can leverage these treaties if our own nation has signed on to it to encourage and maybe even push a little our governments to comply with what they've already agreed to, in particular to the issues around women and women's rights or gender equality. This is an especially useful tool. So thank you again for highlighting this, for telling us how we can leverage these international treaties for the betterment of all women. We look forward to welcoming all of you again to another webinar. Thank you very much.